The marriage contract lay motionless on the dark mahogany desk, like a sentence already passed. Elena Hart stared at the black ink that would bind her life forever, her hands trembling as she held the expensive fountain pen, something she had never dared to touch before. Across from her sat Nathaniel Blake, the most powerful and feared billionaire in the city. His cold, gray eyes watched her not like a man seeing a woman, but like a businessman analyzing an asset. She wasn't a bride. She was collateral. The room was thick with the scent of his expensive cologne and the weight of unspoken pressure. "Sign it," he said flatly. His voice carried no warmth, no emotion. "Your father's debt won't erase itself." Just 3 months ago, Elena had been a normal accounting assistant, working at a small firm and scraping together every cent to buy her mother's medication. Now she sat in the penthouse office of Blake Enterprises, about to become, on paper, the wife of a stranger. Her father had gambled away everything they had. Their tiny home, the family-owned restaurant passed down for generations, even the future of her younger brother Dylan, who now risked dropping out of college. When Nathaniel's lawyers arrived with a proposal, "Forgive the debt in exchange for your daughter's hand in marriage," her family had nowhere left to turn. "I need time to think," Elena whispered. But Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, eyes unreadable. "You have 30 seconds. Your father already signed the preliminary agreement. This is just a formality." And just like that, her fate began. 2 weeks later, Elena stood at the end of the aisle in the city's grandest cathedral, her hand gripping her father's arm as tightly as she clung to the last remnants of herself. The music played, but all she felt was a cold, empty silence within. The custom-made gown clung to her body like it was woven from silk and steel. It was stunning, flawless, but to Elena, it felt like a beautiful prison. Every step toward the altar was a farewell to the life she once knew, a burial of the girl she used to be. On her side of the aisle sat only her mother, still frail, seated in a wheelchair, her brother Dylan, and a few close friends. The rest of the church was filled with strangers, business partners, associates, the press, all there for Nathaniel Blake, none for her. He stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, face unreadable. He didn't smile when he saw her. He didn't move a single muscle. Elena felt like she was walking into a boardroom, not a wedding. The vows began. Elena repeated the words like a machine. "I do." No emotion, no hope, just surrender. The kiss came, a brief, impersonal brush of lips that felt more like a seal on a document than a gesture of affection. Applause echoed through the cathedral. The ceremony was complete. She was now Elena Blake, wife to a man who didn't love her and maybe never would. Nathaniel Blake's estate sat on 5 sprawling acres in the wealthiest suburb of the city. The iron gates parted to reveal a world so luxurious it felt suffocating, and Elena had just been swallowed by it, though she didn't belong. The house was perfection made real. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, priceless artwork adorning the walls. Every room looked like it had been curated for a catalog, not for actual living. Elena stepped inside with her small suitcase, greeted by an older housekeeper with a polite, "Welcome home, Mrs. Blake." But home, to Elena, was just a word on paper. Nathaniel didn't show her around, no gestures, no warmth. He simply said, "Your room is on the 2nd floor. We won't be sharing. This is a business arrangement, remember?" Then he turned away, as if she were a temporary guest. Her bedroom was 3 times the size of her old apartment. Everything had already been chosen for her: clothes, jewelry, cosmetics, all curated by his assistant. Elena realized that even her taste didn't matter here. She wasn't expected to choose, just to wear, smile, and perform. Their first dinner passed in near silence. Nathaniel barely spoke, eyes flicking between his plate and a stack of business reports beside him. To him, dinner was a gap in the schedule, nothing more. Elena sat across from him, trying to chew without tasting the loneliness. That night, she stood at her window, staring out at the distant city lights. Her world, her normal, her family, her freedom was gone. Inside this grand mansion, she was no longer Elena Hart. She was a signature on a contract, a shadow in a golden cage. Elena soon realized that despite its grandeur, the house lacked something deeply human. There were no family photographs, no mementos, no signs that a real life had ever unfolded here. Everything was so pristine, it felt sterile. On long, quiet afternoons, she wandered the hallways, exploring room after room in silence. At the far end of the second floor, she found a door that was always locked. Dark wood, brass handle, no nameplate. Whenever she passed by, a strange pull tugged at her chest, as if something hidden lay behind it, something Nathaniel didn't want the world to see. "The throne is off limits," the deep, cold voice behind her made her jump. She turned. Nathaniel stood there, sleeves rolled up, eyes like sharpened steel. "It's private. Don't try to open it again." She nodded silently. No questions. But the curiosity inside her only grew. The next day, while helping Mrs. Granger tidy up the guest rooms, Elena asked casually, "Has Mr. Blake always been this reserved?" The older woman paused, then replied softly, "He changed after his father passed. Used to be full of life, always painting or playing music. Now he lives by contracts and numbers." Elena glanced toward the staircase that led to the locked room. She began to understand Nathaniel's coldness wasn't his nature. It was a fortress he built to guard old wounds. And somewhere beneath all that ice, a heart was still beating. That evening's dinner was held at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, where crystal chandeliers sparkled above every table, and every conversation revolved around profits and multi-million-dollar deals. Elena sat beside Nathaniel, dressed in an elegant black gown selected by his assistant. She smiled when required, nodded at introductions, playing the perfect display wife. "And this is my wife, Elena," Nathaniel said smoothly, placing a hand lightly on her back. The touch was gentle, yet oddly possessive. The conversation shifted to a manufacturing plant in Detroit. One of the clients asked, "Should we close it by the end of the quarter?" "We'd save a significant amount on operating costs," another added. "But about 300 workers would lose their jobs." Elena looked up. "Right before Christmas?" The table fell silent. Nathaniel turned to her, eyes cool as ever, but something behind them warned her. "This is an internal discussion," he said quietly, his voice sharp beneath the politeness. Elena lowered her voice. "It's just they have families, children. What happens to them?" "It's business, Mrs. Blake," a partner chimed in, half amused. That night, on the ride home, the car was silent. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. "You embarrassed me in front of my shareholders." "I didn't mean to," Elena replied. "I just couldn't pretend it didn't matter." She turned to the window, watching the city lights blur into the dark. For the first time, she hadn't just played her part. She had broken the rules, and he had hurt her. One evening, as Elena walked down the second-floor hallway, she noticed the door. The door was slightly ajar. A warm, golden light spilled out from within. Her heart pulled her toward it. She stopped, hesitant. "Do you want to see it?" came a deep voice behind her. Nathaniel. He stood there, keys in hand, coat slung over his shoulder, as if he had just come home and changed his mind. Elena nodded slowly. Nathaniel pushed the door open fully and stepped inside. After a pause, he looked back at her. "Come in, but just this once." The room took her breath away. It was unlike anything else in the house. Alive, warm, filled with soul. The walls were lined with personal photographs. Nathaniel laughing with his father. A teenage boy at a piano. Framed landscape paintings full of color and feeling. An easel stood in the corner, a half-finished painting resting on it. Crimson skies, layered mountains, soft light. It radiated emotion. "You painted this?" Elena asked softly. Nathaniel nodded. "A long time ago." He walked to the easel, running his fingers lightly along the edge. "My mother was an artist. She taught me. After she died, I stopped." Elena said nothing. In his eyes, she saw grief that had never found rest. "Why are you showing me this?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he said. His voice dropped lower. "Maybe I wanted you to see that I wasn't always made of stone." For the first time, Elena didn't see Nathaniel Blake, the cold billionaire. She saw a man who once knew how to dream, who had known pain, and who was slowly learning to trust someone again. The message came as Elena sat in the library, surrounded by towering shelves of books and golden sunlight spilling through the tall windows. "Mr. Blake has been taken to St. Mary's Hospital, possible cardiac episode." She shot to her feet. The book fell to the floor, pages splaying open like a gasp. Her heart pounded violently in her chest. The mansion around her faded into silence, every sound drowned by the roar of blood in her ears. She didn't grab her phone. She didn't think, just seized her coat and ran, as if escaping a nightmare that had finally caught up. The hospital waiting room was cold and sterile. Nathaniel's usually composed assistant was pacing, tension written across every line of his face. When he saw her, he said only one thing: "He asked for you." Elena's breath caught. She entered the stark white room, where Nathaniel lay amidst machines and monitors. Gone was the man the world feared. No tailored suit, no razor-sharp stare, just a man, pale, cracked lips, and eyes filled, not with power, but fear. "You came," he whispered, his voice faint. Elena sat beside him, took his hand. It was cold and unsteady beneath hers. "Of course I did," she said softly. "You're my husband." A ghost of a smile flickered across his face. "Only on paper." "No," she whispered, her voice fierce. "Not anymore." Silence. The doctor pulled her aside to explain the situation. Nathaniel had ignored all the warnings. Chest tightness, shortness of breath, relentless insomnia. "He's carrying the weight of a company on his shoulders," the doctor said. "But the human body isn't a corporation. It has limits." When she returned, Nathaniel was staring out the window, watching rain slide down the glass. "I'm too much like my father," he said quietly. "He never stopped, thought rest was failure, died alone from a heart attack." "You're not him." Elena stepped closer, brushing his forehead. "And you're not alone anymore." For the first time since they married, Nathaniel didn't look away from her. "Elena, I'm scared," he admitted. "I know," she said. "And this time, you're allowed to be. You're allowed to rest, to live, Nathaniel." A long silence passed between them. No contracts, no masks, no distance, only truth, and for the first time, trust. She held his hand, and he didn't pull away. Nathaniel stayed in the hospital for 3 more days. Eleanor didn't leave his side, not even once. She slept in the chair beside his bed, wrapped in a thin hospital blanket. Every time he stirred in his sleep, she woke up instantly. Every time he opened his eyes, the first thing he looked for was her. And the strangest part? Nathaniel never asked her to leave. There was no coldness, no silent wall between them, just the quiet, undeniable presence of Elena. And though neither of them said it aloud, both knew something had shifted. On the 4th day, as Nathaniel was discharged, the doctor gave him strict instructions: rest, no stress, and most importantly, learn to let go of control. If you go back to how you were, the doctor warned, next time won't be this mild. The car ride home was silent. Nathaniel stared out the window, saying nothing. Occasionally, he glanced at Elena as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Only as the car pulled through the mansion gates did he finally speak. "You didn't have to do all that," he said quietly. He hesitated, his voice rough, like admitting this cost him more than any deal he'd ever signed. Elena turned to him. "Do what?" "Stay in the hospital, sleep in that chair, take care of me like you actually cared." She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. Soft, sad, but I did care. For the first time, Nathaniel didn't look away. He met her gaze directly, unguarded, without distance. And in that moment, Elena knew. He trusted her. From that day forward, life in the mansion changed. Nathaniel stayed home more. He no longer disappeared into his office the moment he stepped through the door. Instead, he wandered into the library, where Elena read most afternoons, and sat across from her. "How was your day?" he'd ask. At first, Elena was surprised. Then, slowly, she began to answer. She told him about small things, how Mrs. Granger had burned a batch of muffins, the novel she was halfway through, the roses beginning to bloom in the garden. And Nathaniel, instead of nodding absently, listened, truly listened. His gray eyes, once cold as stone, softened. Quiet, but attentive. They started having dinner together, not just sitting across a table, but sharing conversation. Nathaniel asked about her mother, her brother Dylan, her childhood dreams. "What did you want to do before you married me?" he asked one evening. "I wanted to work for a nonprofit," she replied, "to help families facing medical crises, like mine did." Nathaniel was silent for a long time. Then he said, "If that's still what you want, you should start." Elena looked at him, startled. "There's no clause in our contract that says you can't live your life," he added with a faint smile. "And if there is, I'll tear it up." That sentence, simple, practical, meant more to Elena than any declaration. It was proof he had changed, not because he had to, but because he wanted to, for her. A month later, they held a small ceremony in the garden behind their house. No press, no contracts, just family, white flowers, and quiet promises. Elena walked toward him, not to repay a debt, but to begin a new life, beside the man she had grown to love. They began as strangers, bound by a contract that knew nothing of love. He paid for silence. She gave up her freedom. Neither of them believed in something as fragile as happiness, until the smallest moments began to rewrite everything. A softened gaze, a hand that didn't pull away, a smile that survived the storm. No one taught them how to love, but they learned, slowly, clumsily, and sincerely. The day Elena walked toward him the second time, there was no debt left to settle, only a heart left to give, and a life still unwritten, one they would now write together, not out of duty, but out of something real. Because in the end, it was never just a contract. It was the beginning of everything.